Welcome to the Frontrunner Show with Carol Nichols.
Hello, I'm Carol Nichols, the host of the Frontrunner Show. I'm thrilled to have you join us. Our most recent guest was Ed Milkey, and he talked to us about 5G and that there was going to be a transformational increase in data, information, and speed. And with that, with more technology, more speed, more data, comes more cybercrime. So our guest today is Matthew Romano, and I wanted him to talk to us and as he would speak to a board of directors of small to medium-sized companies or to maybe C-suite executives on things they can do to be more cyber secure. And he's going to talk to us a little bit today about some of the things going on in the industry that will make you want to be cyber secure in a big way in 2020. And Matthew is a front runner in technology. He has over 13 years at the giant insurance company AIG as the chief technology officer, head of the global network of operations, and he's now providing fractional CTO consulting services to small and medium businesses with Aberfoyle Associates. Also in Matthew's career, he was a principal network engineer, designing networks for Fortune 500 companies around the world. So I'm pleased today to have Matthew here to provide some frontline insight as a CTO on the cyber war that's going on in corporate America today.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Welcome, Matthew. So there have been some interesting events in the news today that aren't just about large Fortune 500 companies. Talk to us about some of the things you've seen in the cyber war today.
Yeah, this week alone has been quite a bit of news. Seems like a new phase in the cyber war. The city of New Orleans and the city of Pensacola were hacked, shutting down entire computer systems with ransomware. And right here in Texas, earlier this year, 21 townships were compromised the same way, and the fallout is still being reported throughout the news.
That's awful. That's awful. And also, I think I even read about some newsrooms in Washington and Montana were hacked.
That's correct, yeah. They had data stolen and their systems were disrupted. One of them said that the newsroom it felt like they were back in the 1990s. They couldn't project the graphics on the walls. They couldn't put any information on the bottom. So they really felt like they took a step back in time.
Terrible when the lights go out. Okay, and then Ocala, Florida, something about a spear phishing attack. So give some insight to one, what that is and what the impact was in Ocala, Florida.
Yeah, so spear phishing is a very pointed, targeted attack against an individual or individuals. In this case, the scammers pose as representatives of a legitimate construction contractor. And using information about that contractor that they hacked, they were actually able to convince the city to redirect $742,000 check into their fraudulent account.
Oh my, so an imposter, just the old dressed up in disguise and said, pay me, and they got paid.
They had just enough information to convince them that they were legit and that they were representatives of the contractor, and they did it. Okay,
money makes criminals very creative. I just heard on the news today about being wary of maybe delivery services that say they need more information, and in fact they're not the real delivery service. They want your information so they can scam you.
Yep, part of that phishing.
So that's being done electronically as well as in neighborhoods. So it's interesting, these cities have been hacked, newsrooms hacked. These are smaller companies, not the big Fortune 500s. Have the targets changed?
Good point. The targets haven't changed, but I think what happened is they've expanded their targets.
Okay.
So they've expanded the small and medium entities. The reason being it's like an arms race. The big companies have been spending a lot of money over the last several years. You know, some of the big breaches way back in 2013 and 2016, like the Targets and the Yahoo and the Sonys. Yahoo was considered the largest hack in history. 194 million people's records were hacked. Mm-hmm. And by the way, even though that was from 2016 disclosed, it's still ongoing now. They just settled this year against another lawsuit against the directors and officers of that company. So big companies will continue to be a target, but because they've invested so much, they're not the low-hanging fruit anymore. Their easier targets are the small to medium businesses, including contractors, non-for-profits, law firms.
Mm-hmm. So they're going after these softer targets, the small to medium-sized businesses, and then through these companies, is that a window or a vehicle to actually get to the larger companies? So talk to us about third-party contractor risk.
Yep. So one of the things the larger companies struggle with is making sure that the people they do business with are as secure as them. And so a lot of times they're actually backdoors. They're sharing their data with partners. They have sharing connections, physical network connections with them, where perpetrators can enter that way. And there's some other interesting statistics around that. I mean, so 43% of breaches these days involve small business victims. And when you start adding in things like army nations of states, like it's reported that North Korea has thousands of people on staff at any given time trying to hack everything they possibly can, in addition to all the computers and countless computer bots that are trying to do their hacking business.
Okay, and just for people to understand, this is actual army. These aren't just hackers in dorm rooms. That the North Koreans have an actual army
people at
that
any
are
given time.
cyber trained and trying to hack and steal information or
whatever
damage.
havoc they can do. I mean, whatever they can do to disrupt the U.S. economy, and also the fact that cybercrime pays. The worldwide cyber criminal revenues this year, it tops $1.5 trillion. And you ready for this?
Uh-huh.
So starting salary is $42,000 to be a cyber criminal.
Okay. Uh-huh.
If you're medium skilled, that can go up to $900,000 a year.
Wow.
And if you're top of your game, you could be making $2 million a year.
$2 million a year to be a cyber criminal?
That's right.
Well, how does that compare to robbing banks? Do they ever get caught?
Very rarely.
Very rarely.
Yeah, very rarely. So
Yeah, because they're, and what I've read, they're in multiple countries, so even if you do identify a bad actor, they just disappear and go on to the next company, right? So very little consequences.
Correct. They just disappear into the dark web or disconnect, or most of the time they're already compromised computers all over the world, so it's even hard to figure out where the attack's coming from.
So if a top cyber criminal can make $2 million a year, are they going to continue in this profession?
Yeah, I don't see why not. There's such a low cost of entry. It costs them just a couple $100 to buy a laptop or piece of equipment and maybe some software, and away they go.
Yeah, so you talk about this an ongoing, persistent threat. So talk to us about the volume or the persistency, or how big a problem is this? Where is all this coming from?
So, there's more and more devices, and there's no turning back. So just to give you an idea of what the potential could be. So the global population is about 7.7 billion from some of the statistics I've seen. And already we've surpassed 12 billion devices connected to the internet. In other words, there's more devices on the internet than there are people in the world.
Wow.
And every one of those can be another potential, could be hacked and turned into another potential cyber weapon. So in addition to all those bad actors, they're turning all those other devices, some of us are guilty of, setting up a Ring doorbell and not changing the default password. Well, that's another device that can get hacked. And, Ring's been in the news lately on some of their issues there.
And
so
then from the Ring, that's just my doorbell. But from the Ring, can they actually get to my valuable data?
It's possible. They can use that as, they can take that over, and then they can continue to see what else you have connected in the house, find an entry point, rattle the doorknobs until they find a door that opens, and away they go.
So the example, whether it's for a residence, the small entry point might be the doorbell. In a company, the small entry point might be a third-party contractor or the heating and air conditioner contractor. And they get in, and once they get in one place, they're able to infect the whole system.
That's correct, especially if you don't have the right controls in place or the right compartments and security policies.
And so talk to me more about the actual, whether it's human error or is it bad actors or malicious, or what are the percentages there?
So 51% of all attacks, this is according to the IBM security study, which I provided to your audience if they want to visit it. I recommend everybody read it. It's basically a report where they looked at 500 companies that were breached, and they put together the cost of data breach report.
And there's the 2019 IBM Data Security Report, which you'll be able to see on my website and on the summary of the show.
Yes. And according to that, 51% of all the hacks are malicious, caused by bad actors. 25% of that is a system glitch. And what I mean by system glitch is maybe it's an IT or business process failure, something that people didn't think about. 24% is blatant human error, meaning somebody you had a negligent employee, they didn't change their default password on something that, or somebody configured a piece of equipment wrong and left the door wide open. They forgot to lock the door, is basically what happened there.
And so with those, when you have those kind of errors or breaches, talk about some of the tail costs. You mentioned that these costs for these breaches and cyber hacks aren't just a one-year cost.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, so long tail costs means beyond the breaches last beyond 1 year, and that 47% of those costs will actually go to 2 and 3 years. And Yahoo, as an example, 3 years after disclosure, they just settled this year for another $29 million lawsuit against their D&O. The other costs that are not thought of too much are your customer turnover. Once they know you've been hacked, the average turnover is 4 to 7%, depending on industry. I think on the higher end, the 7% is for healthcare type industries, but the average starts at 4. Again, class action lawsuits are on the rise against D&O, and the part that really scary is the ransomware. So the ransomware occurs every 14 seconds. And the average cost of a ransomware attack on a business, and this is all businesses, small, medium, large, is $133,000 per attack every 14 seconds. Now, they get larger. The bigger your name and the bigger your revenue, they can set any number they want on that revenue. And basically what's happening is they've taken control of your PC or your server or where all your customers' data is, and they've encrypted it, they've locked it up, and you cannot get back in. And if you want to get back in, here's a phone number to call.
With the money. And
some of these people actually have call centers. They sound like a professional call center. And hi, how can I help you? And okay, well, here's, pay me $400,000. There's no guarantee that after they've got that money, that they actually give you the right key to open up. They'll disappear with your money.
You might have given money and not gotten your data, or you may get the data back and they've left a back door so that they can come revisit you in a couple of months and ask for more money.
That's true too.
Okay, so this ransomware has become a big problem, and that is in the news with the city of New Orleans we were speaking of earlier. And I read that city of New Orleans did have backup to their data, but what's the next step for city of New Orleans? They backed it up. Is that solved their problem, or where do you think they are?
Well, they backed it up. I mean, for a while they were down. They had no email, and other critical systems were down, so they had to rebuild it from their disaster recovery. And thank goodness that they had their disaster recovery 100% isolated from the attackers and then the internet. So they had a means of doing that. But what if the cyber criminals get even smarter? What if they know how to target your backup data too? Now you have nothing, right?
Yeah.
And some companies, they haven't created a good BCP plan or business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan, and so maybe not all of their data is backed up or as well as they think they should. So folks have to start thinking about where's all my data at any given time of the day and what would happen if I lost it.
Yes. Well, and understand how secure your company is. Understand that Moody's is now going to be focusing on data security of both the big companies as well as their contractors.
Yeah. So Moody's is going to start doing cyber investigations into anybody that gives a credit rating. So that means how good is your cybersecurity policy, the technology you have in place, and the third parties as well. And they can actually give you, if you have poor security policy or posture, they can give you a poor rating. And that also includes all your third-party suppliers. So smaller companies, small to medium companies that do business with them will be under more scrutiny. So your current partnerships and your future partnerships will be a lot more scrutinized.
Interesting. So we need to make sure you're compliant and cyber secure, because it might affect your rating, your credit rating, or your security rating. Then you talked about tail costs. Now some of these costs can go on and could grow exponentially. You mentioned Equifax as an example of a long tail cost. Talk to us about Equifax.
So Equifax was interesting because they originally said it was in the low 100 millions, which is still a big number. And then this year, earlier this year, they said 700 million, and it just was in the news recently that they settled at 1.4 billion. So how they got from 700 to just about double.
Almost doubled over a several year period. So
well, even in this case, over the whole period, and then in just the last year, it doubled.
Cybersecurity cost go on, or the cost from a cyber breach go on and on.
on, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and then once you find it out,
it can be
your estimates could be way off.
Way off. Very unpredictable and can be a huge cost. So speaking of cost, tell me some more about what costs are not covered by cyber insurance. I read that companies can get cyber insurance, but there's some costs that doesn't cover.
Yep. And if I may start with, I think every company should have cyber insurance. Small, medium, large, doesn't matter. It won't make you more secure, but at least it will protect you from some of the upfront costs and losses. The average cost for $1 to $5 million of coverage can range anywhere between a couple $1,000s and $15,000, depending on the type of insurance you're looking for. But back to the original question, every policy has its own terms and conditions, so do read the fine print. But in general, loss of intellectual property is not covered. Brand damage, so they will cover you for things like marketing and public relations to help you get back on track, but there is no there's no guarantee that you're going to regain your reputation, right? Mm-hmm. And then the part about that could possibly null and void it, the entire insurance policy, is if you had insufficient security to begin with. In other words, if it's grossly negligent and you didn't have any tools or any policies in place, then they might just say, hey, we're not even going to pay it.
Might not pay. Yeah, so having the cyber insurance, it isn't going to totally protect you. And I think what you mentioned about brand damage, you can't get your reputation back. So cyber insurance isn't enough. You really need to have been cyber secure and not get hacked or make sure the damage is contained. So this is a big problem, and some companies may think that they're too small to be hacked by the Chinese or the Russians, and they wouldn't bother with them. But what is it about a small company that might make it an attractive target to a bad actor?
That's a good question. If I may, there's another report also available to your listeners and viewers that Verizon publishes every year. It's called the Data Breach Investigative Report, which summarizes about 42,000 incidents and 2,000 data breaches. They're in their 12th year now, and this report is an industry standard, so I recommend you folks to read it. But basically, they're saying that 23% of breaches come from nation states. And again, I mentioned most businesses are also connected to other businesses, called B2B, business-to-business connections. And again, because they're back doors into larger companies, they're more likelihood of a target.
Interesting. And then you said that cyber insurance often won't cover a nation state, but people need to be aware that 23% of breaches have come from nation states, like you mentioned the standing army that North Korea has, 5,000 people.
Yep. Constantly
looking for ways to hack, and they very well be targeting a small company because they think will be the entry point into a bigger company.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, and also read the fine print. Sometimes they'll put a clause in there about if it's a nation state actor, then
the insurance not going to pay.
It's quite possible.
Okay, but the nation states are definitely targeting our infrastructure, and they do that through small companies, large companies, big companies. You mentioned earlier in our conversation about the robots and just the constant barrage of hacking, that it's not even done by humans. It's all been automated.
Yeah, correct. And it's as if you had thousands of people at every door in your neighborhood constantly checking for when it's unlocked.
Frightening. That would keep me up at night. So are contractors and small companies, can I think of them as they might be like the Trojan horse that can deliver the malware into a bigger company?
So, yes. I mean, so as part of that Verizon report, 34% of all breaches and incidents now involve internal actors. Internal actors could be your employees, your contractors that you let into your building and into your systems. Sometimes it's unintended, like phishing clicks. Like somebody comes in the morning, they read their email, they click on a URL or a link in their email, and it takes them somewhere that downloads or steals data. And the other one could be people who intend to do it, malicious practice, such as placing malware or stealing data. We hear how many times somebody walked out of a building with data on a little USB stick or memory card. That's pretty common.
Another way to steal. So cybersecurity is a complex and expensive issue, and I hear from other CTOs and CISOs that it's often difficult to get a budget approved for protection for an event that might happen. So it's kind of like insurance for your car. Maybe I won't have a wreck, But what advice do you have to help technology officers move that discussion forward such that the right investments can be made for cyber?
Well, the odds are not in your favor. The IBM and Verizon reports are pretty compelling evidence in itself. You're more likely to get hacked than actually to be in a car accident.
Oh my.
So the question becomes whether or not the hack will be fatal or not.
Okay.
And to continue the car accident analogy, it's you need to spend the money to improve your security posture. Is no different than the law saying you have to buy car insurance to drive the car.
That's good advice. Good advice. So, Matthew, as a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, what is your biggest fear?
My biggest fear is total system shutdown. Not able to get to your data, not able to do business, that type of thing. One thing we didn't touch on, which I think is kind of a good segue, is we've been talking cybersecurity, but cybersecurity is really a subset of info security. And so I have one old adage and one new adage I'd like to share. So you're only secure as your weakest link in the chain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also easier to go through a secretary than it is a firewall, meaning it's easier to, this is cyber related to computers versus people, right? So lately the people is the weakest link in the chain, right? They need to be aware of cybersecurity. They need to understand what phishing is, or how not to fall into the traps. And Roger Grimes, who's a top respected leader at a data defense, and he's a data defense evangelist, says 70 to 90% of cyber incidents are now through social engineering and phishing.
Oh my. Social
engineering meaning, maybe somebody makes a phone call and says, "Hey, I'm down in the accounting department. Is the boss in today?" Or if he's not, maybe they send out an email on his behalf, or every day they gain little bits of information.
Old-fashioned espionage.
Old-fashioned espionage, but then at the end of the day, they have enough information to create a crime.
To maybe know where your backup site is. That kind of scared me earlier when you said it's not enough to have your backup site because they might hack it. So if someone has maybe been with loose lips, what was your adage about loose lips?
Actually, I did have that for later in the show, but so loose lips sink ships. But I added to my own it's loose lips and loose clicks.
Can sink ships.
Can sink ships, yeah.
So if some employee lets it slip where their backup facility is or gives some detail on their backup facility, then that criminal might not only infect the main operation but also infect the backup.
That's correct.
And then you'd really be toast. So continuing on about cybersecurity and info security, because I thought it was important for people to understand that info security is the whole picture, not just about technology and data.
Yep.
It might be the physical plant or the parking lot attendant, or
the whole thing. I mean, do you have backup power to two different power entities? The systems themselves, the people, the processes. Keeping the data and information safe. So in simplistic terms, I'd like folks to start thinking of info security as managing risk. And then risk is the potential impact and the likelihood of its occurring. So you don't need to get rid of all the risk. You should probably focus on, what's the most important, what's the most likely to happen, and then start from there, and then make a plan to fix the important stuff.
Yeah. And just to go back on what you had said that the data evangelist, 70 to 90% of cyber instances are now through social engineering, and so through the people. So the biggest risk is that someone's going to get into your company and hack and steal your data because one of your employees inadvertently left the door unlocked. And so the bad guys are hacking people, not just systems.
That's correct. Yes. And so I think there's some solutions here. I think, well, let me take a step back here. So I've given the two reports that I would advise folks to do some simple bedtime reading, or maybe not do it at bedtime. Might give you nightmares. But it will give you some great insights on where you need to pay attention first.
Okay, and that's the IBM data security.
Both the IBM and the Verizon
and the
data
Verizon
breach report.
And
they have it by sector, so healthcare, finance, banking, everything, right? So you could figure out where you are and which are the highest risks in your particular area and some of the things you can do to fix them. And I also have some other great news here. There are some really good free resources available to anyone, any business, that I just recently found out about. And I actually recommend you leverage both. One of them is from the U.S. government, and one of them is from the cybersecurity industry. Both of which will help you with the holistic cyber plus info security big picture perspective. So last week I had lunch. So there's a company called Security Studio, and I had lunch with the founder and CEO Evan Franson. He was a keynote speaker here for ISSA, and he was speaking at Texas Women's University, and on the topic of how to secure the American business. And he also wrote a great book titled On Security, which I have with me. I'll be showing your audience later. He and the company founded Security Studio. He aims to simplify the cybersecurity industry to reduce the complexity for all businesses. One of the complaints is it's too complex, too convoluted, nobody quite understands it, and it's coming from every direction. So he created, and going back to credit score, he created a credit score assessment. In other words, everybody knows if you have a 350 score, you're doing really bad, and if you have an 800 score, you're perfect, right?
You can borrow money, yeah.
Yeah, so in those terms, he really, and we have screenshots available for the folks watching, and on the references page. So you download his software, you can run it at your leisure, and then it will give you not only a score, but it will give you a really detailed credit report. That, executive summary, action plans, next steps, all of that.
Love that. And I saw that you could actually do a data score for different departments or different divisions, so that way you can benchmark within your company, and you could also probably benchmark, the analyst can benchmark your company with other companies by getting basically a security score.
Security score within your industry, yeah.
And the key is to get started and then know where you are and then improve from there. I think we talked about that some of these small and mid-sized companies, it may just be overwhelming. Where do they start, and how do they become cyber secure? But these free resources that you mentioned, and we'll have them posted on the Front Runner website, as well as we'll flash the links here at the end of the show. These free resources are a way to get started. It's a journey, but if they just get started, it'll get easier each year.
That's right. That's right. And the second tool is a branch of the Department of Homeland Security, CISA.gov. That's CISA.gov. They're responsible for protecting the nation's critical infrastructure from physical and cyber threats. They also provide cyber tools, a little more technical, to assess capabilities and safeguard the networks. They also have a National Cybersecurity Communications Integration Center. It's a mouthful, NCCIC. And they provide 24/7 situational awareness. Like if there is something going on, major hack in the nation, there's hotlines and there's email alerts and those types of things. So the action here for your listeners is download both of these security assessment tools, run them yourself, and then that also ties in with my Get Fit security checklist.
Yes, a checklist. That's what everybody needs to help us move forward. So talk us through Matthew's checklist.
All right, so the top 3 things that every company needs to do, actually it's 3 top things plus 1 prerequisite. The prerequisite is a data recovery business continuity plan. We briefly touched on that. So business continuity, think of that as small scale, particular site loses power in a building, you have no power to your equipment, what do? Do you move to another building? Do you take your laptop with you? Do you break out the paper and pens, that type of thing? Disaster recovery is more on a large scale. I've lost most of my business, or my headquarters is, like we saw in Houston with the flooding, my headquarters is underwater. Right. What do? How do you recover the business from there? You spin up, you have your data, in a separate data center on the other side of the world or other side of the country, and you reconnect to there, you work from home, those types of things. So having that plan is just what I'll call the prerequisite step. And for those who don't have a plan in place, I provided a link to, FEMA provides a link to how to create a simple plan, so it's a template.
Okay, good,
and
good.
It'll walk you through the process.
Okay.
So the crux of the three steps here is perform a risk assessment. And Evan and his security studios says that 90% of all companies fail here. And the reason being is it is complex, but also you can't manage what you can't see, and you can't assess it or measure it. So in other words, you need an inventory of all your hard and soft assets.
Okay.
That's your software, your laptops, your PC, anything to do with IT. Number two, as part of that risk assessment, you run those software packages that I mentioned from his company or the CISA.org or .gov. And number two, you remediate the vulnerabilities. You're trying to remove the threat. Not everything. You're not trying to do everything. You want to fix the important spots. Okay. You know, what's the highest risk, the most probable going to happen. And then you need a continuous patching schedule for patching program for IT assets. In other words, Microsoft releases a new version that you need to download on Mondays and install. You need to keep up with that. Any piece of equipment within your IT infrastructure and your software needs continuous updates when the updates are available. And of course, you should test them before you do that. So the other half of that, of the vulnerabilities, is educating staff on cybersecurity. Phishing attacks, social media attacks. Going back to that loose lips and clicks thing, you might want to think about even a simple policy on what's permitted on social media. Okay. What I mean by that is like LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course, what's posted on LinkedIn is usually a lot more tame than what's posted on Facebook. But I've been guilty of being at IT conferences and I just got my new certification and all that. Well, I mean that tips off people that might be trying to target your company
with a new software, or if you just bought some new technology, there might be some soft spots because it hadn't been patched yet.
Correct, yeah. So, I mean, there's some vulnerabilities right out the gate, especially newer technologies. So
the spies are always listening. This idea of it, you have to think of it as in an espionage environment, that spies are listening and the robots are knocking on your door all the time trying to get in.
And like you said before, there's those emails that look legitimate, and they say click here to do something, and then the next thing you know, your data's been stolen or you have a ransomware virus on your PC. So 1 and 2 is really the crux, but 3 is just rinse and repeat. We need to revisit and test this all the time. This isn't a once and done activity. It needs to be ingrained in the DNA organization from the board of directors all the way down to the last employee. That
retest, revisit,
and also you're part of the security of this company.
Yes. Well, and that persistency, you talked about how persistent the bad guys are, so we have to be equally persistent and vigilant with our security. So this checklist, I think, is fabulous, and we'll be posting this checklist also on the frontrunner.com webpage for our listeners to get to. So. One last question here, Matthew, for you. Will there be more cybercrime in 2020?
So, yes. Matter of fact, so there's been just look at historical, there's been a 67% increase on security breaches over the last 5 years. Expect to get hacked. There's no business or government that's 100% safe. There's something called zero-day exploits, the latest and greatest software that arrives on your cell phone or a new piece of equipment. Sometimes there's holes in it before they even ship it. So, and the odds are data breach are increased. Organizations are 33% more likely to experience a breach in the next 2 years. And some other trends that alarm me are third-party breaches are up 78% in 2019. We touched about why third parties were.
Third-party breaches are how much? 70?
They're up 78% this year.
78%. No wonder Moody wants to start auditing those third-party contractors. Because that's the soft spot for a lot of big companies, are the third-party contractors.
And as everybody's rushing to the cloud, the other thing they find is the number one mistake when going from your business to the cloud is these cloud misconfigurations. And that they feel that would be the leading cause in 2020 and beyond, as to like what happened with Capital One. Somebody made a mistake,
misconfigured firewall or misconfigured cloud.
a piece of equipment, and left the door open, And so the bottom line is businesses can't operate without data, and businesses have an obligation to keep their customers and their employee data safe, and the system's running.
Yes. Well, thank you for your checklist, Matthew. We appreciate the checklist you provided, and that will be posted on the frontrunnershow.com website. So please look there for some links to some of the reference materials that Matthew mentioned for us. And I really want to thank Matthew Romano for joining us today as a Chief Technology Officer with a real insight to the future and an insight to data. So thank you for helping keep us secure, and we look forward to seeing you next week on the Front Runner Show.
Thank you so much.